But I can start off with just an introduction of myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Rushaa Hamid. I'm the research manager at Toynbee Hall. And basically, what I do at Toynbee Hall is lead our research teams, and we do a very particular type of research, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in just a moment. Um,
And just while Risha's working on her slides, for those of you that are new to the group, we come together every month on the first Tuesday of the month on Teams, and usually we'll hear from someone working in a local team about something that they're trying to do to become more trauma informed in the ways that they're working. It could be like starting out, or it could be something that's kind of retrospective and looking back on it and thinking about how different principles have been applied. We also usually on a kind of quarterly basis have kind of more like reflective discussion sessions. So that's what's coming up in December. But today is more of a presentation style. So feeling ready to go?
yes, I should be
Perfect.
now. So hopefully, if it comes up for me. Uh, hopefully everyone can see that PowerPoint now.
Yes, we can.
Great. Um, and of course now it's freezing a little bit, but we'll make do. Um, perfect. So thank you everyone for coming. As I mentioned a little earlier, I'm Rushaa. I'm the research manager at Toynbee Hall. And for those of you that don't know about Toynbee Hall, we're based in the Whitechapel Aldgate East area, and we basically work alongside people um, facing poverty and injustice. Um, we've been around since 1884. We've developed a lot in over those years. I think probably most of you, if you know us, will know us because we have a lot of different advice centers, and we have a community center. But what we also have is we have a very strong research and policy strand, which has actually been about since the 1800s and 1884. But in 2017, we decided that we were going to take a new approach, which is participatory action research. And as you'll see in a bit, there's very interlinked with doing trauma-informed practice and research. So as I mentioned, we have our research and policy section. We don't just do participatory action research projects. We do a lot of community evaluation of services. So we do participatory evaluation. We used to have a thing which we are hoping to start again called the Knowledge Exchange Circle, which brought people from organizations, local residents, to collaborate and develop recommendations in areas that were of interest to them. We're engaging in a lot of coalitions, and we also support our researchers in spinning off projects after they've ended and taking control of them in the local community. And we work with a whole host of people over the years. So probably if you haven't heard of us, you've probably heard of some of these people. Um, so what I'm going to do is talk through the sort of six key areas of trauma-informed practice and how they relate to our participatory action research. And I'm going to be using an example of a recent research project that we just wrapped up called the Emotional Support for Young People Project. So these six areas go by a lot of different names, but broadly speaking, they're establishing a sense of safety. They're about restoring choice and control, supporting someone to cope. This is often also called trustworthiness. Um, they're facilitating connections. There's responding to identity and context, and then there's also empowerment or building people's strengths. And we're going to come back to them in a bit. Um, so, for those of you that don't know what participatory action research is, which I'm going to refer to as PAR from here on in, I figured we'd give a little bit of a brief overview. PAR is essentially a type of peer research, which in itself is a type of research that's grounded in the idea that we all have experience, whether it's lived or learned, and all of that experience is very valuable. And PAR basically takes this peer research idea a step further. And so it's broken into three areas. So fundamentally, the first one, participatory, we want to involve people from the very beginning. At Toynbee Hall, this often also looks like involving people even before we have a research project. So determining what we might apply for funding for, if we are applying for funding, getting them involved in helping us write the bid. But we basically involve people from the start and they lead all the way through. We also want to make meaningful changes. So I'm very against the idea that you do a research project, you make a report, and that report just sits in someone's drawer somewhere. So we always want to take action and make real changes that people can see. And finally, it is research. And what I often say my role is to people is making sure that the research we do is just as high quality as other research, and make sure that it gives really deep and rich insights. So at Toynbee Hall, we have now over 90 trained peer researchers. We have over 200 experts by experience. We're always bringing new people in to join our projects. And most of those projects focus on people on very low income as well. Um, Now, why PAR? Um, our position is it gives really insightful findings and it helps us figure out the right questions to ask. It helps with stronger civic engagement and it does lead to positive social change. And as you can probably see from the types of things I'm saying, obviously the establishing a sense of control is very strong in PAR, but there's also a lot of other points that it really lends itself to this trauma-informed approach, even without really trying to consciously make it a trauma-informed approach, although we do try and make it a trauma-informed approach. Um, and so that leads us to our emotional support for young people project. Um, so I'm going to give like a very short overview of what the project is. I'm not going to delve into a lot of the findings and solutions, just because we will have a report coming out soon that goes into detail on that. And also, if you want to find out more on that side of things, feel free to email me after. But this research project was part of the Health Foundation's broader emotional support for young people program that had different organizations across the UK investigating how emotional well-being in young people can be supported. Um, this was done, we were the lead partner along with Thrive London, and we really wanted to investigate how young people from low-income backgrounds accessed emotional support from their families post-COVID. So as I mentioned, we wanted to see if they got what they needed from their families, particularly in the context of the cost of living crisis. We wanted to look at how the cost of living crisis also potentially added strain. But finally, we also wanted to create solutions and recommendations that were co-produced. So across the project, we worked with 12 peer researchers, and then those 12 peer researchers engaged with 41 young people and 24 parents or guardians of young people. I should say that for this project, we define young people as between 16 and 22. We were really interested in that transition to adulthood period. And as you can see, we had quite a broad range from the sort of pre-18, post-18 group. Um, yeah. And so this is generally what a participatory action research project looks like. For those of you that don't know, it's a very iterative process. So this is not necessarily neatly moving from one section to the next. There's a lot of back and forth. But we do our peer research recruitment and try and make sure that we have a very diverse group of peer researchers. We then get together to co-design what the project might look like. They determine the areas that we're focusing on. They determine what type of research tools we might use, what the theory of change is. And then we move into data collection. So for this one, we did a mixture of focus groups and in-depth semi-structured interviews, but we also did well-being activities, which I'll talk a bit more about later. And then again, we bring people to do analysis, to co-design recommendations, figure out what we want to work on the most. And in this particular project, we went back to the young people and parents. And then after we had our research stage, we did a stage where we all worked together to really develop some of the ideas and recommendations that came out in phase one. And finally, we do the taking action stage. So at this point, we're running a pilot program that takes ideas from the young people, and that four of the young people are actually employed by us as staff on to help lead these wellbeing workshop sessions. But also with the dissemination of findings, we really hand it over to young people. So as I noticed in the beginning, what I'm going to do is go through each of these areas and talk a little bit about how we really tried to address each of these points through the research. It's not going to be exhaustive because the project was a 2-year project almost, and there is a lot of stuff that we did. But hopefully it will give some idea of the types of things that we thought about. Um, so first, when it comes to, oop, did it minus everyone? Uh,
I think you've just gone out of presentation. Yeah, there you go.
yeah, okay, great. So the first is sense of safety. So we co-designed the spaces with young people, and we really thought about how we wanted to engage with different groups. Um, and part of this meant that when that not just getting young people in and getting them to our peer researchers to reflect on what they would want in a space and really design it around that. But thought we also proactively reached out to different participants that were coming to sessions from different backgrounds and had mini scoping and co-design sessions with them. So, for example, we had a number of different neurodivergent participants that were interested in coming, and some of them very kindly agreed to do like a pre-call where we talked through workshop the general structure of the workshop and talked about what adjustments might be useful for making the space more accessible for them. So, for example, we set up special quiet areas um, which had staff attached to them so that we could make sure that from our perspective we were following safeguarding procedure, but we also had places where people could step outside of a room for a bit. Um, we reworked how our icebreakers looked and made sure that people didn't have to speak if necessary. So we had a number of different ways that people could contribute to the conversation and contribute to the research. The other thing that we really tried to focus on throughout the process was understanding that things can always shift. And the aim was not to like make one plan and it would be the perfect plan and we would never have any issues, but rather to make sure that everyone had confidence that we would be responsive to any changes. Um, and therefore they would know that if something started to feel unsafe, um, they could come to us and we would adjust it without question. Um, I think something that often gets lost um, in a lot of the talk about trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practice is this idea that there are some people that have trauma, some people that don't have trauma, and we're customizing our work for the people that have trauma. We take a perspective that anything that benefits one person is likely going to benefit most people, but also that trauma is a very fluid thing. And some people can experience something traumatic and be fine, and then suddenly they're not fine, and then suddenly they're fine again. Um, Sometimes being in a space where you're hearing about people's trauma can end up being traumatic for you. And so we take the position that we're not investigating if somebody has trauma in the space or what that trauma is. We're just working from a default assumption that it will come up. We don't know where it will come up, and we need to do the best we can to make sure that we can be as proactive as we can be and then responsive when we need to be. So in that vein, we had the peer researchers really think about what would make people comfortable in a space, we prioritized, as I'll speak about a bit later, um, making sure that if something needed more time, that we gave it more time rather than trying to rush through and hit particular deadlines. We introduced a lot of flexibility into the process. Um, and as mentioned, like so this is some of the feedback. A lot of the peer researchers said that they really felt like all of the opinions and ideas that they had about how to make a safe space, how to set ground rules, were really considered, particularly at those beginning stages where we had to do a little bit more guidance, as people were a bit nervous coming into the space. Um, as other people said, the ability to steer the focus of the project um, help them really develop confidence that they would be listened to. And that really came into its own down the line. So choice and control, as I mentioned, there was co-design from the very start. Our peer researchers not only decided where we were focusing, but they knew that they could experiment. And so um, we very clearly set up the expectation that while I would give advice, I'm not going to stop them doing anything. And so we did a lot of tests and experimentations of things that we didn't think were going to work, and they didn't work, but it was very important for them to go through that process. There's some pictures here of this wonderful gardening activity. Peer researchers wanted to do something a bit more creative in the research process. And so they said that they really wanted to do gardening and research workshops jointly. And we stuff thought, not sure that will work out how they want. And we talked to them about some of the considerations, but what we said is, we'll just try it. It's something that you're very passionate about and you want to do, and we'll just see how it goes. So they did some mock workshops and it went terribly. It's very hard to hold a conversation while people are gardening and doing different projects. But even though that meant that we had to go back to the drawing board, it was very important um, for the peer researchers to know that even if they had a very out there idea, that we would follow through with it, we would test it out. And later on in the project, they had some more very out there ideas for disseminating findings and for our final end of year event. Um, and I was like, I don't know if this will work. And I had a very stressful time, and it did work, and it went very well. So this is also just to throw out there that none of us know everything, and also it can often be very beneficial to hand over control to a group of people that don't have a preconceived idea about how something should work. Um, the other thing that we did is we really understand that we might unintentionally influence people in how they make choices or what choices they think are possible, as I mentioned before. So we really wanted to take steps to prevent that. So one of the things that we really pushed, especially in the early stages, is this idea of that we would make decisions by consensus, that everyone had to be comfortable with them. But also, we as staff never gave our ideas or suggestions first. So we would give feedback after everyone had had their say and after it was clear like what the group wanted to do. So sometimes we did that with dot voting. So here you can see some of the different findings and areas from the first stage, and we basically gave everyone a sheet of dots about whether or not they wanted to dig deeper into that finding or they wanted to stay away from that finding. And everyone put their dots on and then had discussions about which areas had the most dots and why they put dots on, gradually like narrowed it down. And it was only at the end of that very long process that we as staff came in and gave our reflections on the process. And what this meant was that they knew that while we were there to offer support, we weren't there wasn't any feeling that we really wanted them to go a particular way. I've seen research projects where it becomes very clear that there's something that a researcher really, really wants to look into. And that can make a lot of different participants steer themselves there to sort of satisfy the researchers' eagerness. So we really wanted to make sure that we tried to combat that as much as possible. Um, and so yes, as they mentioned, they got advice from all of us as staff, but we always tried to bring it back to what they wanted to do, what they wanted to see, and make sure that they knew that they were the ones to steer us. Again, as another person said, that there was never a point where we were told we have to do anything. So even if it was something that we didn't necessarily think would work that well, we always wanted to build on it. And, my role was to be like, okay, how can, if we want to do an arts-based activity, how can that happen without impacting anything else? Support structures, often called trustworthiness, um, were another thing that we really thought about. So from the beginning of the project, we had built-in mental health support. We wanted to make really clear that we were not going to be playing the role of therapist, and for us as staff, but also for peer researchers, for participants. So we had a dedicated actual mental health professional that was there and available if they needed to talk or reflect on something that was quite deep. We also did regular check-in sessions and we allowed people to check in one-on-one with us as staff members, but we always made sure that we weren't overstepping our boundaries. Um, Part of what our work was also about, particularly when we had different safeguarding issues, we made sure that we had very clear boundaries with everyone about what we could and couldn't help with as staff and what we could and couldn't signpost to. And this actually really was very useful at engendering a very strong sense of trust from a lot of peer researchers. So we had a lot of different disclosures that we had to manage throughout the process. But the number one reason that people brought is that they had finally felt like they knew what they could get from us. And that made them very comfortable that we would do the right thing and they could trust us to not um, overstep boundaries or manipulate or put them in a worse position than they were currently in. Um, One of the other things we did is we made sure that we always had a proactive response to support. So when we had, for example, when we had last year's autumn budget, when there were a lot of different changes in energy costs or prices, we proactively sent out signposting. We reminded people all of where they could get support, how they could talk to us if there were issues. Um, we kept a constant list of things like food banks, um, but also sending people resources on how to support themselves in different situations. So we know that particularly a lot of the young people were very affected by different global conflicts that were going on. And so we always made sure that whenever something came up that we thought might affect them, we just proactively sent out all of the support to everyone that was on our list, knowing that people might not always come forward initially when there's a problem, no matter how much trust you build into the process. So with collaboration and connections, we started the process very slowly. We wanted to work first on establishing group connections. So we didn't go very heavy into research. We allowed the first few sessions with the peer researchers to be about building um, those links with each other. In turn, when the peer researchers came to designing our research and our workshops, they wanted to try and replicate that. And so they ended up wanting to do an initial half an hour optional arts-based activity where people could just come in and chat and do some painting and drawing. And then they decided to do a mixture of semi-structured interviews and group workshops. So our participants first had an interview with a peer researcher one-on-one, um, so that they could just talk together about things that might be a little bit more personal about their emotional support. And then we brought everyone together at the end to sort of share their reflections. And that ended up working really well. And it was very different from what we'd originally sketched out as what we thought might happen. And again, it took longer, but the trade-off was very much worth it for making sure that there was this real sense of connection with everyone. Um, as I mentioned, yeah, we had the arts-based activity that ended up being the ultimate highlight. And I was actually really good for facilitating connections. And as I mentioned, we're doing a pilot activity, which is about developing connections between young people and their parents and guardians. And it's really launched off how well this introductory arts-based activity went. Um, as a lot of peer researchers mentioned, they really wanted this levity at the beginning to help with the heavier topics. And that really helped with the balance. And what we found was that our recruitment process as the project went on got a lot easier, because people were very much enjoying how much they got on with their interviewer or how much they got on with other people in the group, um, as well. When it came to cultural consideration, we always begin every project with an understanding that a lot of different things, culture, religion, disability, they all shape how we interact with the world. And so we started with our recruitment trying to get as diverse a group as possible. But we also use the resources we have in the background of different staff members to help build trust and engagement. So, for example, um, we had some participants that were from a refugee background. We could have them have quick check-ins with staff that also had family members that were refugees, that knew some of the different issues that were from the same region, that could talk about things um, not from an outsider perspective, which was again was really helpful for making sure that we were on top of if anything um, was re-traumatizing somebody, that we could address it quite quickly. Um, Naturally, we also had interpreters for the space, but also we made sure that all of our question guides and research guides with peer researchers really thought about how these different elements of someone's identity can impact how they experience emotional well-being, which came out very strongly in the findings as well. But it meant it was very much threaded through all of our questions, all of our workshops, and that we were expecting to see some of those differences as well. The final area, empowerment, we wanted to have regular check-ins about skill development and access to training. And so even some of this was very informal. So sometimes it would just be a quick, Russia's going to be looking through the survey results and doing a bit of Excel. If anyone wants to come and see the process and ask questions, they can. And some of it was a little bit more formalized. So do you want more explicit training about facilitation, for example? We always made sure that it didn't have to be all or nothing. We didn't have to get everyone in a group to do any of this type of training, and we really allowed people to lean into what they wanted. So some of our peer researchers got very involved in writing. Some leaned into the presentations and disseminating findings and going and like talking to um, different networks across London. Um, The other thing that we always try to do as well is connect our peer researchers with other opportunities. So we wanted to make sure that this process for both peer researchers and also participants, I should mention, wasn't extractive. We weren't just like getting research out of them, but that they really felt like they were getting something out of it for themselves as individuals and also stuff for their community. Um, and so we really developed a very strong strand, particularly later on in the project where we had a little bit more time to bring in people to teach them. So we had professors come and teach them about social network analysis. We had a videographer come in and talk about his journey into videography. And so we had these great opportunities to do things that you might not expect to always happen in a research project. Um, and as mentioned, like there was a lot of very good reflections. the peer researchers felt very much like they were the ones leading it. They felt very much like team members with the rest of us as staff, um, and that they were very much that they were on the same level. Um, and we as staff members could also see the change in people. So we would often have people come in that were very quiet, very much not necessarily wanting to speak a lot, and then, by the end of the process, they were talking to rooms of hundreds of people about their findings very confidently, which was really lovely to see. So I might just briefly stop sharing because I think I didn't share the sound. Uh, but this is just some reflections from our peer researchers about the process. It's not just about trauma-informed practice, so not all of it will be relevant, but I thought it would be quite nice to see for you all to see how they found it.
It was quite a good experience. Like I had loads of opportunities where I was able to, develop my own skills. But apart from that, I was able to meet lots of new people, like the people that I work with.
Getting to know like the other peer researchers and like creating workshops and meeting new people with them. Being a peer researcher has allowed me to get to know people that I wouldn't normally meet. It's given me the opportunity to do things that I wouldn't necessarily expect myself to do.
It's been a really amazing experience. I've gained so many skills from it. For example, like communication, interviewing skills. And it was also a good way for me to like meet people from my community and learn of their perspectives as well.
When we would ask certain questions to the interviewees, a lot of the time I would be like kind of surprised by their answers, and it made me understand how other people feel at different times and know that certain things that I'm going through, other people are also going through.
It was a really good way to build our own connections as well as learning about different people and the experiences of other people like us in the community.
What had the biggest impact on me was knowing that each family was sort of struggling in their own way. So they might be in like different sort of stages of their family life. But in the end, there's lots of shared experiences. For example, like children taking on the burden for like money matters or children having to mature a lot. So yeah, I think it shocked me because obviously life now isn't the same as it used to be before.
Stepping out my comfort zone has given me the opportunity to be in situations that I haven't felt most comfortable, but I still managed to navigate them.
Definitely getting to meet all like people from all over the borough, all over Tower Hamlets, because you really get to understand like what they're going through and what kinds of things they want emotional support with, or how they're struggling and how we can maybe give ideas to help them.
I think it's always helpful to talk with other people because, that builds your empathy skills, and so I think that's something I'm really happy I improved it.
The way that all of us agree that we haven't had much activities since like when I was a child myself, and that I think it's surprising that all of them loved cooking as well. Like the main idea everyone wanted to do is do cooking competitions.
What had the most impact on me has been meeting new people, hearing stories from people that I wouldn't normally hear, and just enjoying myself through doing those things.
It brings me back to the time where I actually applied for this role, and I remember it was one of those things where I was thinking like, let me just apply, man. There's like, I'm probably not gonna get in, blah blah blah.
Yeah, so that is a sort of very brief overview of our project. And hopefully I've not run too much over time for the actual presentation part. And yeah, I'm now very much open to questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so much. I think you covered everything so comprehensively, and I feel like there's a lot probably to pick up on. People can raise hands or put things in the chat if they have questions or comments for Rushaa. I can start just to get people's minds flowing. But yeah, firstly, just to say, really impressive project by everyone involved. And I wonder what you think were kind of the main enablers for it to be that way. Because I know it was a project funded by the Health Foundation. Was it something that they kind of set out in their ask, or was that something that you approached it and like Toynbee Hall just happened to be a place where it's quite supportive of that way of working?
I think with regard to this, we're probably quite unique in that this is already our way of working. So I can't speak to other projects and the stream that we were in the Health Foundation, but I know that we were more of a test case for the Health Foundation. So generally, the Health Foundation often funds like academic organizations or academic-led organizations. And so they have a little bit more of a traditional approach. And if they bring in engagement, it's normally at a bit of a later stage. And so for this, they wanted to try something a bit different. And so we're non-academic, we're a community-based organization. We wanted to do this participatory action research approach, which if if you know the process, it means that your funding applications look very vague because everything is like, we might do this, but we might not. We don't know. We don't have the peer researchers in yet who determine what we do. So they were very open to that approach. One of the things that they did do and they were very good at is they gave us a lot of extra funding for a lot of the support that we wanted to put in place. So funding to have a mental health professional for the whole project that was just basically did some regular sessions, but was also essentially on call if there was anything that any of the young people wanted to talk about at any point. They were very, very flexible with deadlines. Whenever our peer researchers wanted to try something out. So they were, in our original funding plan, I think that the research was meant to take place over summer. But we ended up, like I mentioned, we ended up trying out the gardening workshops, which really didn't work and had to go back to scratch. And they were very happy to accommodate that. So I think in many ways they were very flexible about a trauma-informed approach, but it wasn't necessarily explicitly within what we had to pitch to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of previous projects that I've had to be very flexible and open-minded about, like, okay, we don't actually know what the result is because we're co-producing it. Anyone from the floor, any reflections? Let's start with Alistair. Go ahead.
All right, that was brilliant. Really enjoyed, appreciated hearing about the work that you've been doing. But I was wondering about, in terms of the sort of methodology of negotiating power and control. See, it's a huge issue in sort of human interaction and identity and all those sorts of things. I'm just intrigued in terms of you've shared and explicitly wanted to give power and control to your participants, your researchers, but that also entails a change in the position of the staff and the facilitators, and I was just wondering how much you were able to reflect as a kind of the staff team in terms of what that was like, in terms of trying to do that, how possible it is, because if we think that well-being is related to having control, which is why we wanted to give it to your participants, what's it like as a group when you're actually having to surrender so much socialized instincts and individual needs around being able to be in control, and how you experienced it individually, because there must have been very different responses as a staff group to what that is like. And then how did you manage or even articulate the differences or the emotional responses? I could go on, I should probably stop. I think you get the idea.
No, I think it's a very good point. So yeah, as we said, I think we're a bit fortunate in that because we've been doing it for so many years, it's now not as like anxiety inducing. So I remember my first couple of PAR projects. I think the main issue with seeding control is you get so anxious about deadlines and getting things done. And I always tell people that funders or anyone that wants to come to our sessions that the beginning is going to look very messy, and it's going to look like there's no way this is going to come together in any sort of cohesive project. And you're going to want to step in and take over. And you have to just trust the process, and that's very difficult, especially if you've not experienced it before. So one of the ways that we manage that with staff is just having regular check-ins on how they're feeling. And for me, as a manager of all of that, it's about reminding the staff that we're fine, and that it is going to come together, and that, you know, the worst case scenario normally with PAR projects is that things just move a bit slower. But that's something that we know and we anticipate and we build into the project, that degree of flexibility. I think a secondary point is one of the things that's often neglected, I've seen in other PAR projects, is when handing over power and when getting people to engage, it's very hard to do that at the beginning because people, especially if a peer researcher or participant has never done it before, they're very used to being told what to do, or that the ultimate decision doesn't rest with them. And so you often spend the first couple of sessions having to really insist, no, I'm not going to decide for you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And it can be very frustrating on both sides. And so you have to make sure that you're not only managing the peer researchers and participants' frustration, but you're also managing your own frustration and your own well-being throughout the process. And so something that we did this time, which I think was very helpful and useful, is we actually had some a number of different well-being workshops for staff that were on the project that were just them, that they could just talk about things that frustrated them, or maybe you know, if you're looking up, if you feel like you're trying to create a trauma-informed space for someone all the time and thinking about all these things, it can be very taxing emotionally as well. And so we had that, and we had a number of different arts-based activities. So we tried a lot of different methods of just having those spaces that were both one-on-one but also group sessions for staff. And it really made a difference, not only in I think reducing people's stress, but also ended up like we had people bringing back like, that was actually really useful. I'm going to tell the peer researchers and participants about this thing I learned. And so it was just helpful for making those connections.
Thank you.
I know you had your hand up, but then you said it was covered already. Was there anything else that you wanted to ask?
Actually, no, it has
fine.
actually been covered. Yeah, thank you though.
Perfect. I think that's really interesting and probably helps build that connection also, or like, I guess, sense of empathy between staff and the people you're working with. I'm so curious about the findings from the project, but I know that you're that's kind of, we have to suspensefully wait, but is there anything that you want to kind of preview?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about some that come to mind as relates to this. I'm not going to go into all of them just because there's a lot of them. We had the part of why the report has taken a while to come out is because if we tried to include absolutely everything, it would have just been way too long. Nobody would read it. But one of the things that came out really strongly is the idea that communities, people wanted space where they could try out new things and fail at things, but fail collectively. And so one of the strains on the relationship between parents and young people currently in terms of providing emotional support is neither of them wants to like be seen as being weak to the other. So parents, when they're stressed, don't want to share that with their children and don't worry about negatively affecting their children. But children also recognize that their parents are very stressed and worried about money, and so end up not wanting to share things with them because they're worried that it would make them upset. And so one of the things that came out really strongly in the workshops is actually there was this idea that both wanted to support the others. That parents didn't just want to support kids, but kids actually wanted to be emotionally there for their parents and have their parents say what they were stressed about, what they were worried about. But it was very hard for both sides to do that. And so this is where one of the recommendations of doing like these different well-being activities that you could like play games or try cooking, but that doing something new where you had to learn together, that you might make mistakes, that then naturally in conversation you could talk about things like, oh, I'm upset that this cooking didn't come out the way I wanted to with this new recipe, or oh, it's really frustrating when you beat me in this game, and that could help spark some of this a little bit more of an openness. So that was one of the things that I felt quite interesting. This idea that like allowing failure can also be really empowering, which I think most people don't think of. And like I said, with the gardening activity, we knew it probably wasn't going to work. We explained why we thought it wasn't going to work to the peer researchers, but we did very clearly say we're going to do it anyway because it might still work. And if it works, that's great. And weirdly, that was a very good experience for them, that we let them fail. They chose something, it didn't work out, they could do something else, and nobody was upset about it. Nobody was angry. They didn't have to be perfect all the time. And that wasn't an expectation for them in any case. So, yeah.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Anyone else have any thoughts, questions, ideas? Yeah, Jordan. And then Aiden.
Hello, yeah, thank you so much for a really interesting presentation. I think it's really, like Angela says, I'm really intrigued to hear more about the sort of the outcomes. But just reflecting on what you were saying about like people sharing about, I suppose, the vulnerabilities of like failing, and also trying to have more like open conversations about feelings of like not perfection or all those kind of themes. It's interesting to think about how and what we can do to enable like those spaces, and I suppose build resilience for our young people, but I suppose more importantly like the parents and carers who surround them. Like in my role, I think, so I cover sort of all children and people's mental health, so there's a massive spectrum of it, but I'm always mindful of the different roles that we expect parents and caregivers and adults around young people to take on, and how there are different levels to that depending on what that presenting need is. So I don't know if I'm expecting an answer or any thoughts that you've got, but I think it's a really, I think for me it's just reflecting on like what we can do and what's within our gift and what's within our power for like those early interventions, like those almost those spaces that don't even qualify as interventions, you know what I mean, almost like parenting skills and capacity building maybe. I don't know, lots of thinking out loud there and waffle, sorry.
No, this is what our current pilot is. It was like one of the strongest findings was about doing something that was a lot a bit more of an earlier intervention that would help create those networks, so that when something did go wrong, people are actually using what was accessible to them. So the project that we're doing is it's already started, and it's going to run through to March next year. And basically it's a real mixture of things. I will say, it's been co-designed further by the group of participants that are doing these workshop sessions, and there's like going to be people coming in to talk about like CV writing. There's going to So there's not just stuff about emotional resilience in there, but it's more about getting any of those conversations started, because for what we found in the research is just starting those conversations was the important part, and getting people used to talking about things that might be a little bit more difficult for them was a good launching point. Anecdotally, what we know from we've had a lot of feedback from parents and carers that attended the sessions, the findings and the workshop solution designing sessions, that just knowing that that's what young people wanted, that young people also wanted to support them, has helped them start those conversations. So I was talking to one mum who, she said that she always used to think that it would be really bad to talk about the stresses that she was going through with her kids, and she'd always been taught that like you keep difficult things away from children. But after the workshop sessions and hearing how much the young people wanted to connect to those parents on her level, she started having weekly sessions over like Friday night dinner with her sons, where they all talk about what's been worrying them over the week. And she said that this actually really helped her create connections with her kids, and it's not actually made them less worried. When she was worried, it would make them more worried. But she mentioned to me that her son had said, actually, now that they know what's going on with their parents, they don't have to speculate on what's going wrong, because they were like, we could tell that you were stressed and worried, but now that we know, like, it's about like, you know, this week it was about like paying for the gas bill, or next week it's about this, that we don't have to like speculate worst case scenarios. And it feels like, you know, we're just a family sharing things, rather than, you know, everyone's got their secrets. So I think some of it is just about, weirdly, about sharing what young people want and what parents and carers want, and just getting everyone on the same page.
I think, can I just come in on that, because I think it's helpful, and I think it's all almost around like conversation starters, isn't it? But I'd be interested to know and think about how it sort of spills into, I suppose, research around like parentification and all of this kind of stuff for young people. I suppose there's probably, again, and I don't know this, but I'm presuming there's probably quite a fine line in how that could be tread with young people and their parents.
No, I think that definitely came up. So a lot of there were a lot of findings on like the role of gender and how expectations get put on a lot of young people by gender. So I agree, it's a very delicate thing to thread. I think what the young people wanted was a sense of not having an expectation to solve the problems, but just to feel like they're in the loop about what's going on. And I agree, it is a delicate balance, and like not one that I necessarily think can be solved quite easily.
No.
So, but yeah, it was, parentification was something that was touched on a bit in the findings, as well.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to seeing that report when you've got it. And I might link up with you outside of this, because it sounds like there might be a bit of think about how we can work together and overlap. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jordan. And I wanted to come back to you because I saw your hand flicker up and then go back down.
Thanks. Do we have time? Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed that, Rushaa. Thank you. It's quite emotional, actually, especially part you just talked about, when you gave a little bit more detail about those kind of conversations some of the people were having. I actually missed some of it. I had to step out for a moment, so apologies if you've already covered this. But one thing that caught my attention was when you said that you offered kind of verbal ways for people to take part. Did you go into more detail about that, or if not, would you mind doing that?
No, I'm happy to. I don't think I went into too much detail, but what we so one of the things that came out with a lot of, particularly when we did the neurodivergent scoping, is that the idea of talking in a group was just terrifying. And so what we did in those situations is and to be fair, we've done it for a lot of other sessions as well. But it was useful to have those sessions anyway. So we had a lot of different things. We did like post-it notes. People could write on post-it notes and put it up on the wall, depending on the session. So when we had like the solution session, we had like all of the findings plastered all over the walls, so people could like put post-it notes or dots or whatever on there without having to talk to people. And that was also useful for just stopping people influencing each other, because sometimes you get like the loudest voice in the room dominates where the conversation goes. We also used Miro boards a lot, and so gave people links to like this like online post-it board where they could add stuff. And sometimes people added things after the workshops had finished, they remembered. We gave opportunities for people to have like one-on-one chats rather than group chats as well. But basically we tried to make it as flexible as possible so people could contribute in a way that worked for them. Some of it came out as like drawings, and then they would explain the drawings. Something I didn't talk about, we did like a social network analysis where we got people to like draw themselves in the center, and like radiating out from them depending on their level of closeness were their different support structures. And we left it very up for interpretation of what that is. So we have some very interesting sketches. But it just meant that if people didn't feel comfortable talking, they could do something else and didn't feel like they weren't adding anything to the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you. I feel like that's helpful to kind of highlight that there's many more than one way to be able to participate in something. And I also like wanted to go back to how you pointed out how it was important that the opportunities weren't extractive. Like I know that like oftentimes services will provide opportunities for feedback, but that's so different than like enabling opportunities for people to develop and like truly gain something that like is for their future and not just for the purpose of that service improving. I'm not saying that that's entirely wrong, but just that, you know, if there's opportunities to do it that way, then it can be helpful. We're just coming up to 12:30. I wanted to say thank you so much to Rushaa and the whole team. I can see, I think Sumati was here as well from Thrive London. Just like such a cool project, and we'll definitely share the report once it's available with the wider community of practice. So thank you for coming and presenting. I've put a form in the chat for people to complete to share feedback, and Rushaa, I can share that with you after, just to share like kind of what you enjoyed or what you want to see in the future. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming today, for sharing your questions, and see you in December, hopefully.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one.